All right, we're live. All right, Mark, thanks for coming on my channel.
Hey, thanks for having me. So it's a big responsibility to talk about linguistics.
Yeah, well, no worries. I just like to chat and hang out. So I've been watching some of your videos lately. They're pretty good on linguistics on your channel. How long have you been doing that?
The channel?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know, 5 years?
Okay. So you must have started that right around the time I was first starting to get interested in linguistics. Let's see. I lived in El Salvador in 2015. That's when I really started learning Spanish and getting interested in what linguistics is. I don't think I quite knew from very early on what linguistics actually was.
What it really knows.
You probably have had the same thing a lot of times where people, I would tell people that I'm a linguistics major in university, and people would go, "Oh, what language are you learning?"
Yeah.
As if majoring in linguistics means something similar to like, "Oh, I'm majoring in Spanish or majoring in French or something along those lines."
Yeah, I get that all the time too. It's kind of a pet peeve when I say I'm a linguist and they say, "Oh, how many languages do you speak?"
Exactly.
I use that as a teaching moment. Say, okay, let me tell you what linguistics is first, and then I'll answer this, how many languages I speak. The problem is, you try to tell people that linguistics is about understanding language, not languages in particular, but
Right.
just having an understanding of languages. So you try to explain that, but then the problem is that I think most linguists, because they're interested in language as a whole, they end up learning other languages.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember in my linguistics class, a lot of times, the phonology professor would bring something up, and then a student would raise their hand and say, "Well, did you know that in Algonquin this happens?" And you're like, "How many classes?" And then the next class, someone's like, "Well, actually, in Croatian, you can have phonemes like this, and I was like, it's every class someone's bringing up some language that they speak in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Linguists very often can speak other languages, but it's not a requirement,
No, definitely not. I think, you can be an English speaker and specialize in the English language. You have a
Right.
particular area of interest and you use English as your language. I mean, there's
Right,
nothing wrong with
exactly.
that. The problem too is that sometimes, if you're, for example, if you're studying something in English, it's hard for you to make any assertions to say this is how English works when other languages may use the same structure. So you end up having to go to, all these other languages you were talking about, these obscure languages,
Right.
to talk about English. And then once again, you have a stereotype that, well, oh, you're a linguist, so you must speak a dozen languages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then it's, like I was saying, it's kind of strange because, after doing my whole spiel and explaining, no, it's not quite like that and stuff. And then say, well, how many languages do you speak? And I say, well, I speak like 7. You go, how many?
Exactly.
That's actually another, I think, interesting topic for me that, when people say, how many languages do you speak? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I know a few words in Japanese. I understand a few, sentences. If I'm watching a video in Japanese, oh, I understood that part. I understood that part. Do I speak it? Well,
Right.
just a few words I do, but doesn't make me a Japanese speaker. So how many words do you need to know in the language? How many, how much fluency do you have to say, I speak this language? I saw on your channel that you learned Esperanto. That was actually one of the first languages that I got really, really fascinated by years ago when I started learning it. And it's so easy to learn that after, a couple of months, I'm fluent.
Right, exactly.
So I started learning that and I was like, well, I don't have anybody to talk to. So I don't know if I'm really fluent, if I can really speak it.
Right.
Today, if I get something written in Esperanto, I can kind of understand what it means. But am I an Esperanto speaker? I don't know. So how many languages do you speak?
Exactly. I mean, it's a gray area. It's like what's the difference between blue and green? Sometimes it's like, well, they melt together. I had someone, I was doing a live stream, and this guy was in the chat, and I mentioned something like, I speak more or less 5 languages to different degrees, right? And well, I speak English, I speak Spanish. My French is, I'd say, conversational, and my Esperanto is as well. And I'm learning Thai, and I'm getting better every day. And so I mentioned I speak about 5 languages, give or take. And this guy came on and he was like, no, you don't. You speak 2 languages, and you're not even native level in Spanish. And I was like, well, hold on. I actually have a channel. I don't know if you knew this about me. I have a separate channel that I call Finctum Esperanto, and it's the entire channel. I do nothing but speak Esperanto, and it's bad Esperanto. Like, I make lots of mistakes. I stumble over my words. I forget to use the accusative case, but I don't know what I'm doing on that channel if it's not speaking Esperanto.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I saw one of your Esperanto videos this morning. Kind of made me, homesick for the time that I used to learn, and I could actually understand, most of it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Also, for me, I basically never studied Portuguese ever in my life. I did a few Duolingo courses on Portuguese just for fun, or on occasion if I meet someone from Brazil. I went to Portugal for a few days a couple of years ago, so I studied a little bit of Portuguese. But for all intents and purposes, I never really dedicated any amount of time to learning Portuguese. But I can go on a Wikipedia article that's entirely in Portuguese and basically read the whole thing and have more or less an understanding of most of what's going on.
Yeah. So do you speak Portuguese? How do you answer that?
Right. Well, and at some point, languages just get so similar. I mean, Spanish and Portuguese are very clearly distinct languages. But, then you have Galician somewhere in there, and then other dialects. And at some point, it gets hard to classify how many languages are spoken in that area. Maybe not exactly in that example, but they have those dialect continua where one village can understand the next village, and then they can understand the next one, and then they can understand the next one, but the 2 villages on the opposite ends can't understand each other.
Yeah, it's one of those things that when you ask a linguist, what is a language? You go, oh no, not that question, please.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
really the difference
hard.
between a dialect and a language. Yeah.
Like if Portugal had never become a country, if it had been part of, if it were part of Spain, would it be considered a separate language, or would they call it a dialect of Spanish?
Yeah, right. Because I don't know if you know the answer to this, but is Portuguese further away from Spanish than, like, for example, Catalan or Galician?
Well, Galician and Portuguese are
very.
I don't want to offend any Galicians, but it's essentially the same language.
Okay, yeah.
I think the intelligibility is like 95%.
Really? Okay. That's interesting. I went to Galicia one time a few years ago, actually, and I remember like being able to read Galician and thinking like, oh, it's basically Spanish. But maybe that was just like sort of an artifact of my own like expectation that I would be able to read it because I was in Spain.
Well, in Galician, they use the Spanish orthography to represent the language more than the Portuguese orthography.
That makes sense.
So that's why sometimes it's like, okay, this looks like Spanish, but when they read it, it sounds like Portuguese.
Right.
It's really interesting. But like I said, I don't want to offend any people from Galicia. If there's anybody in the audience from there, teach us something here, because I don't know. I'm not an expert in that,
and neither am I. It can be kind of sensitive discussing people's languages sometimes, especially when neither of us are a native speaker. But anyways, you brought up the orthography, and that's also an interesting topic as far as linguists goes, because a lot of times I'll have people bring up, oh, well, you studied linguistics, so what do you think about the spelling of this word? Or I've had people mention that, oh, I studied linguistics, and then they bring up some fact about like the Chinese script or cuneiform or, you know, the Phoenician alphabet or something along those lines. And I'm like, you know, I mean, that's interesting. As a human being, I'm interested in that, especially, you know, as someone interested in languages. But I think that also sort of betrays a little bit of not understanding really what linguists do.
Yeah, the way I like to explain it, you know, that's one of these misconceptions like that, is if you, I don't know, if you have a heart attack, you don't go see, I don't know, a nephrologist. You know, you don't go see a, gosh, give me a specialty there.
Like an optometrist or a
yeah, right. You go see a cardiologist.
Yeah.
So people don't understand that linguists are kind of like doctors in that sense, that you can say, oh, I'm a linguist. Yeah, but what do you do? You know,
right.
Somebody can be interested in phonology or morphology or historical linguistics. Like, I love sociolinguistics. You know, just absolutely, when I was studying linguistics, I loved everything. But when I started learning sociology, I just fell in love with it. So when you start talking about orthography or phonology or this, I'm like, yeah, okay. Start talking about sociolinguistics, I'm like, yes, let's talk about this. You know, I find it really interesting. Along the lines of, you know, what makes a language, the politics in you know, language. Why is it that this language in this country is called a language? In this country, it's a dialect. In another country, they say it's just bad use of the language. You know, so there's a lot of psychology involved in classifying how people speak with a dialect, a full-blown language. You know, just different language varieties. I think in the United States, we're kind of spoiled by the fact that, you know, everybody kind of speaks a fairly uniform language. But even here, it's like if you speak with a Southern American English accent, you're perceived a certain way. See, there you go. You got me going with this. You're perceived a certain way. So like if you have, I don't know, a Mississippi accent, a Southern accent, oh, you sound, you know, friendly, kind of funny, you know, a good old guy, hey, but kind of stupid, kind of uneducated, you know. It's like, do you really have to talk like that? I mean, to the point that people that have certain accents in a business situation, they change their accent. They try to smooth out their Southern accent to sound a little more neutral, whatever that is. Yeah, exactly. Speak with a thick New York accent. Oh, you're rough, you're rude, you're this or that, which has nothing to do with the actual person. It's just different language varieties.
Yeah, people don't always realize, unless you give it a little bit of thought, that all languages are changing. You know, languages are always evolving, and they evolve kind of randomly and in different directions.
Yeah.
And, you know, whatever is considered standard today, 100 or 500 years from now, you know, 500 years from now, it might not even be recognizable anymore.
I hope not.
Yeah. But it gives people this strange sense that one of the variations of the language that evolved equally in the same way that all the other ones, but one of them is the right one and every other one is wrong for some reason. I always think of there's this comedy sketch by Brian Regan where he talks about he was on an airplane and then the pilot came on and he was like, sorry folks, the tower just told us that we have to we can't take off for another half hour. And Brian's sitting in the passenger seat and he's like, well, so what about that? Like, what's the tower gonna do? Come chasing after you? You know, like it's the mechanic who has the real power of you taking off. Like the mechanic, if you had, you know, broken your engine or something, then yeah, you're not going to take off. But the tower is just going to tell you not to do that. Hey, you come back here. You know? And I kind of get the same sense of people who say like, oh, language is supposed to be a certain way. You pronounce the word ask as ask because it's spelled A-S-K, not A-K-S. Right. And it's funny. I had this conversation with someone not too long ago because we were discussing. I was actually discussing my social linguistics class. We were talking about the African American vernacular English, and the guy was like, "Oh yeah, does it mention anything in there about pronouncing ask like A-K-S when it's supposed to be pronounced? It's spelled A-S-K, so it's supposed to be pronounced that way." And I was like, "How do you pronounce Wednesday or February?" You know, like, since when do English speakers ever determine our pronunciation based off the spelling of a word?
Yeah, because at some point those words were pronounced. I guess Wednesday must have had a D there somewhere that we just kind of lost. And I'm sure that when it started changing, a lot of people said you're supposed to pronounce the D. Right. It's spelled with a D. You have to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, as language changes, people start adopting different, you know, ways of saying things. And if you happen to be in the less prestigious version of the language, you're kind of screwed. You know, you're going to be discriminated against. You're going to be seen as or perceived as, you know, stupid, uneducated, this or that. But I think, I don't know, it can't be helped to a certain point. You know, human beings like to find differences. And if your difference puts you in a different group, I don't like you. That difference irritates me. Why do you say ax instead of ask?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
it's like the Dr. Seuss book with the Sneetches. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Some of the Sneetches have stars on their bellies and some don't. And they, just slowly, but.
So I think, you know, it's just human nature, but at the same time, there's the, you know, hopeful side of me. At the same time, I think we can get past it. We can learn to get past it.
Sure.
You know, when you hear a different accent, you hear a different accent. There's no way around it. You know, we have ears to perceive sounds and inflections and so forth. So you will hear differences. Now, what you attach to those differences, I think it is socially learned. So we learned that, you know, somebody from California sounds whatever, superficial. Somebody from New York sounds rude. We learn to associate those sounds with, you know, human characteristics. But we can't unlearn that. We can stop and think and say, wait a minute, you know, how many times do you have to run into someone who's a nice person, educated, intelligent, or whatever, and to realize it's like, well, the way they talk has nothing to do with any of those things, you know, with their social status or personal characteristics. British English, you know, have you noticed how, you know, a lot of times when they here in the United States, there's a commercial for some high class product, you know, and you have, you know, handsome people walking around using the product and stuff. The narrator will be speaking British English.
Yeah.
You know, you never see a commercial for like barbecue.
Right.
Barbecue joint, and the narrator speaking, you know, received pronunciation, you know, British English. And then you go to the UK, and mind you, a lot of Americans think, oh, you know, British English sounds just so, you know, fancy, so
sounds like the Queen,
educated. And then you go to the UK, and they're discriminating against each other's accents because they have all these different accents, and nobody really speaks like the Queen except the Queen.
Right.
I think something like what we call British English, or what people learn as, you know, in ESL, what they learn as British English, I think it's something like only 2% of the population in the UK talks
Yeah,
that
the
way.
received pronunciation or whatever.
Yeah. So you have this whole second language, what do you call it? The ESL industry selling, our materials are in British English, and
right.
you're going to be able to speak this beautiful, perfect English, but you're learning something that people don't really use.
Right.
But that's what people want to buy, and that's what they sell. That's what they promote. Then people think, well, it's true. British English does sound better. It is correct. It's better than any other English. And so they just keep perpetuating that stereotype.
Right.
Sociolinguistics, I find it just fascinating.
It's funny that you bring up that. I mean, you're absolutely right. At least here in the U.S., anytime we hear a British accent, I don't know, maybe some people would distinguish between like a Cockney accent, like, I don't know, like an Oliver Twist type accent or something like that, maybe or maybe not. But we could hear, I feel like, almost any British dialect, any British accent, and just think that's classy. But then I also just, I don't know, read or saw a video or something not too long ago, I guess maybe a few years back now, about how in Disney movies, almost every villain has a British accent, either like a British accent or a German accent. The hero always is American. They always have an American accent. It doesn't matter if the movie is from China or France or, it doesn't matter what movie, what country the movie is set in. The hero always has an American accent and the bad guy has a British accent, which doesn't make any sense.
And probably a New York accent.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the good guys will have like a Midwestern, neutral accent, whatever that is.
Yeah.
The villain will have like a New York accent or something like that. That's right. Yeah. So you see, once again, it's like I'm not even sure that people that create, these products, that they're really aware of their own stereotypes and, the messages that they're sending. They just know, well, this sounds classy. This sounds, like, whoa, the villain. Right. And this sounds like the good guy. And they just go with it, And in a way, I think linguists have a responsibility to dispel, these stereotypes. If linguists that don't have those stereotypes themselves, they have the responsibility to do that. Actually, I was just looking a couple of days ago. I have a video on my channel talking about descriptive and prescriptive grammar and the whole feud that people have about grammar, especially online. And I thought it was, a great video because I criticized both prescriptivists and descriptivists.
Yeah, but I saw the video.
You're a jerk sometimes, and you are a jerk sometimes. Both of you are going on and on about this stuff without really knowing what you're talking about. I thought it was a great video, just cast light on the issue. I lost like 8 subscribers. Yeah. I lost 8 subscribers. I don't know how many I gained, but like the net gain was negative. So it's like, yeah, I did a good job.
Yeah, if you're pissing someone off, then you know you're doing something right.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's really hard. People have these stereotypes, these strong beliefs about language or anything, race, and it's just a stereotype is a stereotype. We're just using different, you can use facial features or color of the skin or the way you sound to justify your stereotypes. And once people lock in on, their beliefs, it's really hard to dispel them.
Right.
That's why that sometimes I see these online discussions, and you have people that I think are very well intended. Both the descriptivists and the prescriptivists, they have good intentions. The prescriptivist wants to make sure that people speak proper English, that they sound educated, that if they apply for a job, they'll be able to write an email correctly and
Sure.
get ahead. So yeah, these are, they have good intentions, but when they start, bashing people for, just writing a silly tweet incorrectly, it's like, oh, just let go. Come on. At the same time, descriptivists start ganging up on them and saying, oh, language changes. That's the way the language is. Then they start coming across as, grammar doesn't really matter. Just use any language you want. So when you do go apply for a job and you don't get the job, come talk to the descriptivist that misled you that, life is real. There are real life consequences. Not saying that, people shouldn't have their own dialect and they shouldn't be proud of the way they speak and how they learn the language, but you kind of have to get a job, and when you get a job, they expect a certain standard. Unless you change the standard so that everybody will benefit from that change, or just let people survive, let people do the best they can without shaming them, but also without telling them, it doesn't matter, just talk any way you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Real.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it would be great if we could just totally do away and dispel the myth that somehow ask is better than ax, or like that you can never use the habitual be, things like that. But you don't, especially for me as an English teacher, you don't want to go too far in just saying, that there are sort of norms that are expected, and they're not always right. Like there's no linguistic reason to actually believe that ask is better than ax. It's just two variations of the language that evolved in different ways. But for purely practical reasons, there are just consequences to learning one variation of the language as opposed to other ones.
Yeah. Actually, I'm working on a video right now. I'll give you a little preview. We're talking about grammar and the second language learner. So I was looking for materials for the video, and I found one that I was just like, my jaw dropped. So I'm still wondering if I should use that in the video because it's kind of damning for that teacher. But essentially, the teacher was talking about song lyrics, and one of the lines had the word "ain't." I ain't got no something. I ain't got. So she said, "Well, ain't is bad English. You should never use ain't. If somebody talks to me and says, I ain't got no money, I will never talk to that person again."
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
Terrible.
Just taught students to discriminate.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then at the same time, I found a second video, somebody talking about ain't. And she said, ain't is not considered grammatical English. And if you use ain't, people will think you're uneducated, so you should avoid it. However, a lot of times people will use it either to make fun of something or because they're relaxed. So they say, oh, I ain't got no time for that, which I thought was brilliant. She was teaching the language learner that, okay, this word exists. Don't tell me it doesn't exist. It does exist. It is even in the dictionary. And there are appropriate times for you to use the word. So if you hear someone using that word, don't run away from them.
Yeah, exactly. I grew up always believing, I was taught as a child that ain't is not a word. And so you should never use it because it's not a word. Yeah. And now looking back, I was like, well, what is ain't if it's not a word? it has consonants and vowels and it has meaning, you know.
If it ain't a word, what is it?
Exactly. Like, is it just a puff of air that came out of my mouth by accident? Like, you know, it's a word. It's a word. It has a meaning. We know what it means. We use this word to communicate. You can say it's not, yeah, okay, we all agree. It's not like a prescriptivist word, you know, and it's certainly not a word that I would ever tell any of my students to use in a job interview. But it's a word. Like, if you say it's not a word, you just don't know what a word is.
Yeah, you just confuse the heck out of students when they start doing that, because you say, "Oh, it's not a word. Don't use it. It's bad." But they listen to songs all the time,
right?
And they hear bad English, so it must be really confusing to be learning English. And people are saying these are the rules. It's on the test, and if you use "ain't" on the test, you know, you're marked down. Or if you say, you know, I don't know, like there's many people there, like there is many people. Oh, that's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. But people say it all the time. You know,
right?
Exactly. There's a lot of times I use, you know, there's a lot of times, and then they go, well, wait a minute. No, I learned it this way, but people use it this way. And then you have to tell them, well, you know, on the test, this is what you have to write. You have to. But when you say it, it's okay. You know, so it's much more comfortable for prescriptive. I don't want to use the word prescriptivist, but that's what they are. It's much more comfortable for them to say, this is the rule, this is right, this is wrong. Done.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to do my job as a sociolinguist. I don't have to be a sociolinguist to teach English. I can just tell them, this is right, this is wrong. End of story. Yeah. It's kind of a cop-out, I think.
It is, yeah. But it's such a pervasive mindset. It's such a pervasive myth in our culture. I remember when I first started getting into linguistics, sometimes I would just post questions on my Facebook just for fun to see what my friends and family would say. Like, for example, today I posted, how do you pronounce the word crayon? All right, where I come from, we pronounce that as cran. Where my wife comes from, it's pronounced crown, which I thought was hilarious the first time I heard that. You know, I'd say probably most people say crayon or something like that. Anyways, just as an example, I post questions like that sometimes for totally descriptive reasons. I am interested in hearing what people say and how they say it because I'm interested in language. One of my friends commented on my post and he was like, not this post in particular, this is a few years ago, on a post like that, and he said, stop critiquing our language. I know I speak terrible. I was like, no, it wasn't a quiz. I wasn't checking to see if you know the right answer. There is no right answer. You know, like I'm just interested in hearing what you have to say. And no matter what you say, I will accept that as your answer. If you're a native speaker, of course, you know, like, you know, sometimes non-native speakers just say something that's wrong. But yeah, it's like people have this idea that there's just an authority, like the tower in the airport analogy, where like someone just decided that this is right and that's wrong, and we all must blindly obey whoever came up with that.
Yeah, and especially if you're learning the language. I mean, as a second language, you want to know the answer. You know, so how do you say this? You know, how do you say this in English or Spanish or whatever language you're learning? How do you say this? You know, you don't want a dissertation about that. You want the correct answer. You know, just tell me how you say this. In language, it's a lot more complicated than that. You know, there's not one way of saying anything.
Right.
Again, it's much easier. It's a lot more comfortable to say, let's create a standard grammar. There's no argument. You know, but then that becomes a weapon. You know, people weaponize standard grammar to put other people down, to say, you know, you're stupid, you're uneducated. So I don't know. You know, I teach English. I've taught writing, developmental writing in college, Actually, teaching developmental writing was very interesting because I had a very diverse student population, and a lot of students they spoke some kind of dialect. So they were the ones that would say "ax" or "ain't," double negatives. And so I was teaching them these things. How do I teach this without minimizing how they speak?
Right.
A lot of times they would write something, and for example, they would use a double negative. I'm like, well, I understand what they're saying. They did communicate the idea, and that's the purpose of writing, right? You're communicating ideas, but I'm getting paid to teach them academic writing.
Yeah.
What they expect, isn't it? So how do I balance, respecting their dialect and telling them, okay, this is wrong. You're wrong. This sounds horrible. No, I would just say, oh, this is really good. I like your ideas. Let's go over this and look at some of the academic language. I would say, see, like this is called a double negative. You should say or this, or either say, not or any, or so. And they would go, oh, that's right. It sounds better. It sounds better. And I say, no, not really. It's just it's more academic because I didn't want them to feel like this is the better English. You're learning a better English. I wanted them to know that no, you're learning academic English. That's how people write. You can, when you go talk to your family, to your friends and stuff, even in class, just use the English that you know, what you're comfortable with. But if you're going to write like an academic paper, these are the expectations. And I think it was pretty successful doing it that way. I think they didn't feel threatened. It's like, oh, I'll never be able to learn all this stuff. I think when you start imposing a standard, people fight back. I don't want to learn this crap. It's like, it makes me feel bad. Therefore, this is not good. But I was just trying to give them a sense that, you can be bilingual in a way. You can speak this way, you can use the language this way, but now you're learning a second way of using the language, and they were interested. I believe, they were interested. They wanted to correct themselves, so their writing would be more academic. And they had, I had good results doing that. In talking to other teachers, like, oh no. Sometimes, the other professors that we'd be talking and discussing, just talking shop, how do you do this? How do you do that? And some of them were just flat out, my student wrote this. How funny. I'm like, and sometimes I don't think they like me very much because sometimes I call them on it.
Yeah.
I remember once, I don't remember exactly what the grammar point was, but somebody was making fun of a student who wrote something, and it irritated me so much. I looked at them and said, this is a great teaching moment. I hope you captured that moment to teach the student something. And I just kind of walked off. And it was like this dead silence in the room. So they didn't like me very much.
Right.
But I didn't care. I was not there for them. I was there for my students.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. You're standing up for them. It depends on, like, are your students writing poetry? In which case, like, go for all of the ain'ts and the, you can do in poetry, do whatever you want. Are you writing a job interview or a resume or something like that? Then, you just got to find the right register for the appropriate situation.
Yeah. If you're writing song lyrics, use ain't. You've got to use ain't. And double negatives and all that.
I was just listening to, I was listening very closely to this song. I was trying to study it because I was thinking about using it partially in a video that I create, that might create in the future. But I was listening to the song Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. And there's a lot of little language things that she does in there that sounds totally normal and natural to me as a native speaker, but might just not be the way that we teach languages a lot. Like, for example, she says, "Well, I've been afraid of changing," right? And I listened to this lyric so many times. You ever listen to something so many times it stops like sounding like language? But no, I mean, you listen to this, she says, "I've been afraid of changing," which totally is normal English. But if I were to teach that to like a ESL student, I might say something like, "Well, I have been afraid of changing," right? And then it sort of makes sense why I can't, or for years and years, I wasn't able to go and watch a Spanish movie or listen to Spanish music or Spanish radio and understand what they're saying. Like, that was one of the most difficult things for me to do. I could have full conversations in Spanish, but not be able to watch a movie. And I think part of that is just because it'd be the equivalent in Spanish of being taught from your textbook to say, "I have been afraid of changing." And then what the movie or the song actually said is, "I've been afraid of changing." And I just was never taught that.
Yeah. I stopped. I've been teaching ESL for a long time, and I stopped using song lyrics almost as soon after I started teaching. So I rarely. Sometimes my students ask, "Oh, can we do a song?" And I'm like, "Oh God, really? Do you really want to do that?"
Yeah,
because it's that's what the language is, And I think music also has its own language. There are a lot of poetic liberties used in lyrics, and I'm not always good at explaining all that. But yeah, you're learning proper, correct, standard English, and then you're faced with that. You're watching a movie. So in English, one of the grammar rules in English is that you have to have a subject, a verb, and then complement, right? Mm-hmm. If you ask a question, you have to front the verb. So like, you went swimming. Did you go swimming? Great. Yeah. So you practice that. Students get really good at saying that. And then you watch a movie, and they say, "Where you going? Where you going? Where's the verb?" Right. Or working late tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are you working? Working late. Well, that's how the language is spoken. I try to, without getting deep into linguistics, sociolinguistics, and all that, I try to pass that on to my students. It's like you're learning a model. This is the model, the correct model, but then you kind of play around it. And there are rules for breaking the rules. You can't just ignore the verb all the time. There are certain situations where you can't. The subject and the verb, they're understood from the context, and it's it's kind of complicated. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of experience. So like watching movies. After you've watched a few movies, you start getting some sense of how people break the rules. But that's being realistic. So going back to our English materials are in received pronunciation, and everything is well pronounced, and you're going to learn the perfect English. Yeah, good for you. So learn the perfect English that nobody uses. You're going to sound really good, but you won't be able to understand people very well, and people will look at you like, "Why do you talk like that?" So you're going to spend a lot of time, energy, and effort building this language so that you can then take it down and just say, "No, I can't. I have to drop all this fluff because people don't talk like that." Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we have to present, as an English teacher, I think we have to present the language as it is. Give them a model, but also say, this is the language, this is the part where you get to have fun with it. There's, I forget the name of the channel. It's somebody from the UK, Papa English, Papa.
Not sure.
Yeah, I can't remember, but it was really refreshing to see him teaching, British English, but he was teaching them like how to drop verbs, how to, like, this is how we speak. And sometimes he would make fun of it. He would say, well, in the textbook, you will learn, how to say, I don't know, you say it this way. And he would say it like with the Queen's English.
Oh, yeah, right.
Say blah, 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 blah. But then when you come to London, this is how we say it, like something that students love saying, so, oh, American English is not correct because you don't say, butter, you say butter. No, butter.
Right.
And then I go, well, did you know that in the UK, when you learn British English, they teach you to say butter, but when you go there, they say butter.
Right.
They say butter. Oh, but that's wrong. That's wrong. I said, no, that's how a lot of people in the UK say butter. They say butter.
Right.
They don't say, don't get this butter. The other butter is better. They say, don't get this butter. The other butter is better. And they go, oh. Well, that's what this guy was teaching on his channel, how to say butter. This butter is better. I thought it was just genius. It's like, you can say butter, but most people will say butter.
It's really interesting to me for someone to say that a certain allophone is not correct. Like, or like if you manifest your phonemes in a certain way, that's incorrect, as opposed to like, I guess it'd be easier to say, well, every sentence must have a subject. So you have to, I can see a prescriptivist saying you must have every sentence with a subject, but how can a prescriptivist tell me which allophones can fit into my phonemes? Like, doesn't make any sense. But I've been using some videos with my students, some of my English students, about a very similar YouTube channel where this guy, he goes through, it's called Learn English with TV series or something like that. It's funny because the title of the YouTube channel is actually questionable English to me. Learn English with TV series. I don't know how you would pluralize that. TV series is. But anyways, what he does is he'll just take a clip from a TV show where these people, they're actors that are trying to speak English just the way that we speak in normal everyday life. And then sometimes he'll slow it down and he'll say, all right, your English teacher taught you to say, I don't know. But what this guy actually said is, I don't know. I don't know. Like, there's no consonants in that word or in that whole sentence. I don't know. It's just a stream of flowy vowels together.
Yeah. How do you write this word?
Right, exactly. M, capital M, lowercase m.
M, I thought it was an N.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, you your mouth, so it's an M.
I guess it's up for grabs. I think there is a lot of very strange, like, phonological illusions that happen, because I distinctly remember when I was in my phonology class in college, and one of my friends asked me how to transcribe the word king into the IPA. And the way that the natural way that seemed the most natural for me to transcribe that was K, then like the lowercase I, and then a N, whatever you call that, the N with the G, right? And to me, that's what it sounded like. When I sounded out all the sounds of the word king, I heard K, E, And I mentioned that in my class, and the entire class thought I was crazy because they thought it was very clearly should have been a capital I, K, I, But there was me and one other student in my class who we all, the two of us, we both heard the word king. Like, I don't know, for whatever reason, that representation of the word king in our mind has the E vowel, not the I vowel.
So wait a minute, you hear the short I, right? Or E?
I heard the tense E sound. E.
King? Oh yeah, I
mean,
say that.
When I hear you say it like that, I know that's not how people actually pronounce it. But if I'm okay, here was actually the test that we came up with. Does the word king sound closer to the word kin or keen? And where keen clearly has the E vowel and kin has the I vowel. And to me, it seems like king has the same vowel as
keen.
Yeah, but I actually downloaded, I had Pratt downloaded on my iPad, and I went through and I looked at all of the different formants of the vowels as I was pronouncing the word king, and I could see that it actually was closer to the word the vowel I than the vowel E. But it's a very powerful illusion that for some reason is in my mind. And for some reason, I hear the E vowel when I pronounce king, even though I know that maybe technically it's not actually true. Although I think there is some strange phonological process that happens that the vowel in king actually is a little bit different. It's like somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, sometimes depending on the environment, you may be raising that I. When you go to the ng, you raise your tongue just slightly.
Right.
So it sounds like I remember some people now. I'm thinking, people saying king instead of king.
Mm-hmm.
You raise your tongue slightly, so it's I, but you perceive it a little more as an E.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. In some parts of the South, people are losing the difference between pen and pin, like right with and a pin, a safety pin, or a pin number. They say pin. You're supposed to understand what they're saying.
Merger.
Pin, but it's not. They don't say pin or pen. They say something in between.
Right. Yeah. It's not like a clear. And that's the same thing with my king. When I say king, it's not a clean E or a clean I. It's something in between there.
Yeah. So that you raise the E and you lower the I. You kind of meet in the middle. So they know what they're saying. They hear it. They think they can hear a difference. But to most people, it's just so close to the end that it's like, what are you saying, pen or pen?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I had a friend that used to not make that difference, and I kind of joked around and said, "Are you saying pen or pen?" And he said, "That's the same thing. You just said the same thing." And I said, "No, I'm saying pen and pen." He said, "I don't hear the difference." He couldn't hear the difference.
Yeah, I had something very similar. This was so weird. I don't understand how my brain was processing this, but my first ever linguistics class, I was like the Linguistics 101 lecture in college. The professor was going through all of the different IPA vowels, and he had like that open O, that's aw, and then the O, the A sound, which is ah, and he listed those two different phonemes, and I could not pick up on the difference between ah and ah. And I asked the professor, I was like, what's the difference between those two vowels? And he said, well, one is ah and one is ah. And I thought he was like joking with me at first, because I was like, those two things sound so similar. It's like the slightest difference between those two vowels. And so he said, well, maybe you have what's called the cot-caught merger, where you would pronounce the word C-O-T as different from the word C-A-U-G-H-T, right? Because some people just pronounce them as the same. So for years, I thought I had that. in my accent. Until one day I said hot dog, and then I realized there actually is a very slight difference between the way I say hot, the vowel in the word hot, and the vowel in the word dog. I say hot dog, not hot dog or hot dog.
I say hot dog.
So for what you say, what do you say?
Hot dog.
Hot dog, yeah. Wait, you say hot dog?
Hot dog.
Okay, but so I think you
hot
said
dog.
The same
when you make it.
Yeah. I think it's a California thing, though, right? Like they have there's a caught merger in California, but it's the opposite way as it is in like New York, if I'm remembering that correctly. But anyways, it was very interesting for me because I had spent years thinking that I could not hear the difference between ah and ah, when actually I could all along. I actually make that distinction in my dialect, in my accent. And it was there all along. It was just like, I don't know.
I think especially like native speakers are not always really good informants. You know, they can't really, if you ask a native speaker, you know, how exactly do you pronounce this word? They may not be able to tell you. They have to keep talking to themselves, and then they start getting all messed up because they start saying, oh, I say hot dog. No, hot dog. No, dog. And you kind of lose it, because it's just natural for you. Your tongue goes where it needs to go for that vowel, and you don't think about, like, why do you say hot but you don't say dog?
Right.
There's got to be an explanation there. I'm not that kind of linguist. There's got to be some kind of rule, that like internal rule that you're using, but you can't tell. You can't really explain.
Well, I mean, to me, they're just different phonemes, but they're very close together. But there's no rhyme or reason for words where I use ah and words where I use aw. They're just separate phonemes. It's not like rule based for why I would choose one as opposed to the other. It just depends on the word.
And the spelling is just,
right.
It doesn't tell you anything.
Right, exactly.
That's what a lot of people do too, especially non-linguists. They say, well, the word hot and dog, they're both spelled with an O. So they have to be pronounced the same. No. Yeah. Forget it. Spelling tells you very little about how you should pronounce a word. And there are so many different varieties, that use, like you were saying, in California, they do this rule this way. In New York, they do it this way. It's just the way it is. And that's what keeps linguists busy, trying to understand that stuff.
Right. And there's no shortage of things to study, because language, as soon as they get it studied one way, the language is just going to change again.
Yeah, and they keep finding new stuff, new phenomena that people hadn't thought about before. So there's always something. But I'm still partial to sociolinguistics.
Right. Is there a reason that you were drawn to sociolinguistics in the first place?
I don't know. Why do some people like pineapple on pizza? I like maybe the fact that it's not as dry as, for example, phonetics. Phonetics can be really dry. It's about finding out the phonological rules and describing how things change in this environment, that environment. I'm like, really interesting, but kind of dry. And, sociolinguistics is more, maybe a little more applied to language happens in real life. Like in real life, nobody thinks about phonemes and morphemes, and they just open their mouths and speak. And I like the fact that once people produce the language, either their internal language or a language that they're learning, once they put it out there, it's perceived in a certain way and it's judged in a different way. It has a function. Why do you change your accent when you're, or shouldn't say your accent, but why do people sometimes change their accent when they're teaching a class, when they're giving a speech, or when they're talking to their friends?
Right.
What's up with that? You know, why don't you speak exactly the same way? Why do you even change your vocabulary? You know, I might say a word to my friends when I'm talking to them, but here in a live stream, I want to keep it, you know, what, clean or
Yeah.
void.
Right.
I find it fascinating to understand, you know, how how we navigate the world using language, and we make these decisions like really, really quickly.
Right. Do you know the study that I'm thinking of? It was from like, I don't know, maybe the 50s or 60s, where they were in New York and they went to different department stores and they would ask like, where are the shoes? And the people in certain department stores would say they're on the 4th floor. And then people in other department stores would say they're on the 4th floor.
Mm-hmm.
But then the researcher would say, excuse me, or could you repeat that? And in certain department stores, they would then change it from the 4th floor to the 4th floor.
Oh,
when they were asked to like repeat themselves.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So like, go ahead.
So, you know, it's like, I'm not putting down any other branch of linguistics. I think if you find your niche, you know, if you think phonetics is great for you, you should just go into it and, you know, learn as much as you can. Just a personal preference. I like morphology a lot. I think it's really interesting how, you know, sounds change depending on how, you know, where they appear in a sentence and how sounds are reduced. Like English is crazy, especially when you teach it, how, you know, depending on your intonation, all these, you know, super segmental features of the language, you know, intonation and stress and where you put the stress. Sometimes the word can change quite a bit. You know, I find that interesting. And
yeah, it is.
Maybe not as interesting as sociolinguistics, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's understandable about how some people could be kind of turned off by like the very theoretical nature of a lot of like phonetics, phonology, syntax, and then sociolinguistics is all about like people and, you know, and how people interact and fit into society and stuff like that, and how they use language in real life.
Yeah. And I have a degree in developmental psychology.
Okay.
So, you know, I like that kind of approach. I was actually able to use social psychology to understand language, you know, a lot better. I went into developmental psychology, and it was like a perfect marriage, you know, being able to understand psychological processes, how people understand the world, and even cognitive psychology.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. In language, this is, you know, I remember when I was in graduate school, I'd be taking, I don't know, like a class in cognitive psychology. And the professor was teaching some phenomenon, and I would say, oh, this is interesting in language. And I blah, 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 and then ask a question. They would look at me and say, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Let's talk about the brain, you know.
Right.
So it was a good marriage, I think, to be not just a linguist, to have like this one way of looking at things, but to, you know, come at it from different angles, and to be able to, you know, having taught for a long time, to actually see how people acquire language and use the language and things like that. So I'm a total language geek.
Yeah, you and me both. Well, I think I'm going to end the live stream here. But thanks so much for coming on and having a chat with me. And you know,
thank you, Aaron.
Happy to have you on again in the future at some point.
If you're interested. That was a very pleasant surprise when you asked me. Say, hey, why not? You know, let's talk about linguistics. And every your invitation and being a really good host.
Thank you. My pleasure. Well, all right. So thanks to everyone who has been watching, and we'll see you guys next time.